keep on working also during the lockdown. Then agriculture, industry, these have been impacted much more. Here, maybe in the part of the industry, it also depends on the field. Car industry has been impacted very severely. Also, agriculture, because there has been shortage of employees, and also there are the social distancing measures taking place. So, for instance, the prices of fruits and vegetables have increased in France because of that. And of course, the biggest impact has been for tourism, for event management sector, and for them it's even more difficult because there is no information when they can really start working again. When we talk about digital services, then the biggest French newspaper, biggest financial newspaper, Les Echos, wrote an article, and they pointed out that digital services in France might have a pretty good perspective now and also in the future, because French have been always very concerned about their data privacy questions. But during the lockdown, when people were forced to work from home, they have become maybe a little bit less concerned in that field. So I believe that here in the field of digital transformation, many changes can come up in France. But I would love to give the floor now to Hector, who can give you more detailed information about state aid to the startups and so on. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to connect with Estonia again. Thank you very much, Christelle and Christina, for setting up this this webinar. So I suggest to firstly go through the situation of the ICT sector in France in the pre-COVID-19 period, because there have been many interesting developments over the past years. I don't know how you guys are familiar with the French tech sector. As Christina mentioned, I worked 2 years in Estonia, having the same position at Christelle and Amélie. And it was interesting to see the differences and similarities between the two systems. While in Estonia, you had some very interesting developments in the after the Cold War, linked to the development of e-governance and of an ecosystem which was really accelerated by the founders and first employees of Skype. In France, we had many big attempts to build some high-tech companies. I'm thinking about our own attempts to build a French internet, or our attempt to foster the ancestor of the telephone, the Minitel. These attempts have been huge industrial failures. And it took place during the golden age until 1981, where we kind of recentered our innovation and technological innovation models into a more decentralized model. And so over the past years, we have succeeded to build up some interesting big companies, such as Atos, which is the result of different merger acquisitions, Capgemini, which is a huge consulting IT company, Dassault Systèmes. These companies have entered the CAC 40, so the union of the biggest French companies, and have worked quite well. We also had quite a big growth in terms of startups. It's being driven by the expansion of digital champions, and as this report from France Digital, which is the main federation of startups in France, and EY point out, there have been quite an important growth of turnover in 2018 compared to 2016, and this element had been constant over the past year in 2019. I think it's important to also underline this 5 billion investment plan, which was launched by President Macron, and who raised the bar to 6 billion a few months ago. This 5 billion investment plan was basically aimed at accelerating the rise and development of tech champions and to create 25 unicorns. We're still quite far from this objective. Proportionally, Estonia is a much more interesting country than France in terms of unicorns, but we still have 8 unicorns. And I'll come back to this a bit later to describe who are these unicorns and what they do. So alongside with these announcements, I think it's worth also explaining briefly the declarations which have been made and launched in January. The government created 2 programs to monitor, accelerate, frame the development of its more ambitious startups. The first one is the Next 40, gathering 40 companies, including some companies which are who are already unicorns, and the La French Tech 120 for startups which have the potential to become global technology leaders. So here, I just wanted to point out a few criteria for this group, so you can probably compare this with your own ecosystems. So these Next 40 group, Next 40, so these companies are either unicorns or businesses which have raised more than 100 million euros over the past 3 years. And so it's delimited to a certain set of companies. You have BlaBlaCar. You probably heard about BlaBlaCar. It's a ride-sharing company, but for longer trajects, so different market that what Aurélien will describe a bit later. You have PayFit, which is a CRM company. You have Voodoo, which is a gaming company. It's interesting because some of these companies consider France as their main markets. I'm thinking about Doctolib. I'm thinking about OVH. And OVH, it's a French cloud provider. Doctolib, I'll come back a bit later about this, but it's an online booking platforms for doctors and patients, which have been of good use during the 2 past months, as you can imagine. And some companies like Voodoo mainly operate in the US and just have their office and engineers in France. La French Tech 120, it's I would say the subcategory of Next 40. So all the companies who have the capacity to become unicorns and which have been flagged by the government as having the potential to reach this stage, and as so the French government support them in every way, help to provide some infrastructures such as Station F, which some of you might have visited when they came to Paris, etc. As for the financial trends, you can see that there was really an exponential growth of this French startup ecosystem, which is quite a transversal ecosystem, gathering some B2B, B2C companies, attracting some international investors. And so you can see that the number of deals, which was limited to 212 in 2014, have reached 784 in 2017. So it's quite impressive. Of course, this year, La French Tech, which is the equivalent of your startup Estonia, kind of reframe its provisions, and I think will not have an amazing year for venture capital deals in France, but let's see. For the moment, the original forecast for 2019 was 768. So this number might shrink, because even though the digital and IT sector is not the most impacted by the COVID, it still suffers the fear of investors. Here, just a small comparison I find really relevant because a few years ago we were still lagging to catch up with Germany and the UK, and now we're far ahead than Germany in terms of deal activity for tech companies, but we're still lagging behind the UK. I think it's important here to remind that the ICT sector in France don't represent the same share of GDP that it does in Estonia or in the UK. I think in Estonia, and Christelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's around 7%, while in the UK it's 6%, and in France we remain to 4 or 5%. So it also partly explains this difference that we have with the United Kingdom still. Second part, and it's not a funny part, COVID-19 effects on the French economy. So I think it's just important to stress that I fully agree with Christelle. The ICT sector and the startup scene were not the most impacted by the COVID. I guess it's exactly the same thing in Estonia, but the INSEE, which is the National Statistic Institute of France, particularly point out some important losses in traditional sectors such as construction, market services, food processing, automotive, etc. And so it's true that over the past 2 months we already lost 5 points of GDP, and as mentioned by Christelle, this is something that should continue during the next semesters, and the provisions are quite pessimistic at the moment. Just wanted to flag also these sectors, exactly like in Estonia, I guess, but hospitality, airlines company, energy as well have been hugely impacted by the crisis, and we have some important companies in this field, including some good startups such as NeoN, etc. And they suffered from this crisis as much as everyone else. So as for the state response, I'm starting with the general measures which have been unleashed, and then I will go into the specifics of the startup the startup oriented measures. So the French state decided to guarantee 300 billion of bank loans to companies, acting as a lender of last resort, and avoid the spread of doubts and problems in the banks, in the main French banks' portfolios. They have unleashed 2 schemes enabling the French Public Investment Bank, which is the equivalent of your Credex, to provide state guarantees. And so basically they have a scheme for big companies and a scheme for SMEs. Companies which goes up to 5,000 employees in France. And the goal of this scheme is to enable banks to quickly provide liquidity to any company that needs it. So there was also a stimulus plan which was unleashed for startups. The French junior digital minister, Cédric, announced in the beginning of March that he will unleash a liquidity plan of 4 billion package to support the startup liquidities. So in this package, you have bridge loans for startups, accelerated payment of planned investments, also some flexibility on the side of tax credits. I could have also added an interesting vehicle that we have in France, which is called the Crédit Impôt Recherche, so credit research tax kind of. And so we facilitate, the French government facilitated the development of this Crédit Impôt Recherche to support the startups during the crisis. And it has been one of the most popular vehicle over the past 2 months in this sector. So just a few points about the Confidence Barometer, which can be visible in the recruitments which have been made over the past months. The metrics are kind of constant in France compared to our neighbors, thinking about Germany and the UK, but we can, of course, some studies forecasted a 70% drop in interview proposals in France. It's more or less the same tendency in Europe, but there was a specific period from the 1st of March to the end of March, where we actually really had a complete fall in our recruitment tendencies. So we could forecast this, and now it's getting a bit better. The trade federations of the French tech ecosystem, Syntec Numérique and Tech in France. In Tallinn, I worked quite a lot with the IT Federation, which is the equivalent of these two federations in France. So they unleashed diagnosis of the situation based on the return that they had from their members, and they analyzed the conditions for reviving business. It's very interesting. They listed many proposals on different topics, going from taxation to training. I say there is a big issue of reskilling, which is pointed out in the reports of these different organizations, who really point the fact that it's important to accelerate the digital transformation of SMEs. Maybe try to have the state backing this movement through specific tax measures to cut taxes on cloud investments or CRM investments, for instance. So that's a reflection which is going on. And the trade federations also underline the importance to strengthen cybersecurity, which have been quite an issue in France during the crisis. Like every crisis, you have an increase of the cyber attacks on healthcare institutions, governmental institutions. So I think that's something that the government has in mind, and which has been stressed again by the trade federations. Also, the fact to link digital and ecological transition have been mentioned several times, both in the press and by the trade federations. And I think that's an element to keep in mind, because it wasn't so apparent to the public debate in France before. Just wanted to conclude this presentation with two examples of companies who did quite well in this crisis. Very different size. Covidom, it's a small application which was created at the beginning of the COVID-19 period. They provide remote medicine tools with an alliance of companies. For instance, they work with Microsoft on Azure to provide their technology to hospitals. They worked with the APHP, which is the main federation hospitals in France, gathering all the hospitals of the Parisian region. And the goal was to promote medicine tools for patients who were not in such a bad stage that they needed to be at a hospital, but still needed a medical follow-up. And the second one, you might have heard of Doctolib, because I think it's one of the most promising companies in the French startup scene. They worked extremely well with both doctors' federations, hospitals, and governments, because they had the capacity to kind of measure how the French people were reacting, because they could basically assess the evolution of appointment demands. Doctolib, it's an online and mobile booking platform that helps the patient to find some specialist doctors. They are also working on a scheme to develop some cooperation between doctors. So and so they recorded that before the 11th of May, which was the day set by the government to end up and ease the containment measures, they recorded 5.9 million appointments the week from the 5th to the 11th of May. So I think that's interesting to stress, that these two medtech companies have did extremely well. Overall situation, which is, I would say, extremely worrying for the French economy in general, with heavy tendencies which might last in traditional sectors. I'm still quite confident for the IT sector, and we'll look forward to observe this in the oncoming months.
Okay, thank you very much, Hector. So if ever you have some questions to Hector, Hector, you told me that you have to leave maybe before the end of the webinar, right?
Unfortunately, I have to leave, but I'll be happy to answer your questions. If Christina, you can provide my email, and I'll be happy to answer or to share the presentation as well.
Okay, because for the moment we have not received any questions in the chat or question and answer, but yes, of course, if there will be, I will share. Thank you very much, Hector.
Thank you.
So I will now give the floor to Arnaud. So please go on.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Arnaud Castagnier. I'm working since January as a head of communication policy for Skeleton Technologies. So an Estonian company, but I don't know if all of you are totally familiar with the business and the products we're producing, but I will explain all of this a bit later. Before this, I was working in Estonia for the e-residency program as head of PR. So if you don't have a lot of questions about ultra capacitors, you can also ask questions about e-residency or this kind of topics. So I don't hesitate to ask about it, because I've been working there for 2.5 years. And in the past, so before Estonia, in the past, I've also worked in France as communication officer of the former French President Hollande, and in Belgium as a director for political outreach of Digital Europe, which is more or less the lobby of the tech industry in Europe. So so my presentation is going to be. Can you see my yes? My presentation is going to be a bit different, because we're going to talk about topics which are much more industrial. Indeed, because Skeleton Technologies, which is sometimes described in Estonia as a startup, sometimes not as a startup, sometimes as being in the clean tech sector or energy sector, but Skeleton Technologies mostly works with industrial clients. So just in a few words, Skeleton Technologies is a global leader in ultracapacitor-based energy storage. So meaning that we produce energy storage devices with like high power density and long lifetime. And just to summarize and to explain to people who are not familiar with ultracapacitors, we'll often compare ultracapacitors with batteries, as we compare Usain Bolt with Mo Farah. Meaning that it's not that one is better than the other. Both are extremely good in what they do, but ultracapacitors are mostly interesting because they can charge and discharge very quickly, whereas batteries charge and discharge slowly. So they have different use. Sometimes ultracapacitors are more suitable, sometimes batteries, but very often, as we see, it's when you use both for the same vehicle that you can have the better result. But I'm explaining this because it means that we also collaborate with some battery manufacturers. We're part of European Battery Alliance, which has launched several projects in Germany, and also is going to launch some projects like IPCEI in France. So this is important also for the way we brand ourselves. Is that we clearly explain that we have a dual identity, and we are the best of both worlds. We are the German engineering and the Estonian IT. In a country like Germany, for instance, we do emphasize much more on the German part, of course, because of the fact that when you deal with media clients in Germany, they may trust a bit more the like the German SMEs and this kind of companies. I mean, Germany is a country with a very with a strong trust in the expertise of high tech manufacturing. But in a country like France, we don't need to emphasize that much on the fact that we are also kind of a German SME. So we really add the two identities, the Estonian and the German, because we also benefit from the fact that Estonia is now widely known in France as having strong expertise in the IT sector, particularly in terms of software development, etc. So we've got 120 employees in both sites, in Saxony, Germany, and in Estonia. A strong customer base ranging from the European Space Agency to auto manufacturers like Skoda, or some of the ones that I'm not supposed to mention, but we also work for Volvo, for instance, and other car manufacturers, and also different kind of companies like Wrightbus, for instance, who used to operate buses in London. We raised 60 million euros, more than 60 million euros over the last years from both public and private investors, like the European Investment Bank, for instance, and Inno Energy. We in the kind of market we operate, like ultra capacitors, but in general, all of the sectors related to energy or environment, the role of public investment is extremely important because it's always necessary to raise money, but including for things like building a factory, expanding it, etc. The production cycle is extremely long. It can take like around 10 years or something, which is why, for instance, if we compare ourselves with one of our French competitors, they are also mainly financed by BPI France, which is the national equivalent to the European Investment Bank. So we deal with this kind of public investors, meaning that we're also very dependent on some kind of public policies that can support or not the emergence of this kind of technologies. Okay, I'm not going to stay too much on this. So we work with different kind of industries, going from crane, public transportation, automotive industries, grid, renewable energy. So all of these, all of these sectors happen to be some of the ones which have been like very strongly affected by the coronavirus and by the lockdown. But going back to topic of France, what makes us still more or less optimistic about the forecast of France as a market is also the fact that after this pandemic, we also expect that the French government is going to like heavily invest in supporting the switch towards more electrification and towards the transition into a more carbon neutral economy. So, because that's the one of the main specificities of France as a market and as economy is that actually the economy really heavily depends on what Paris and what the governments may decide, which sectors to support, etc. Whereas in a country like Germany, we have to deal much more often with regional governments, with the lenders. But given all the prospects regarding things such as like the EU Green Deal, which is supposed to invest more than 1 trillion euros into the transition into a more carbon neutral economy, we do expect that even if 2020 looks very, very dark for France, it can still generate very important opportunities for us and for the ultra capacitor sectors, because all of the different industries are going to mostly receive public subsidies if and only if they also start to focus much more like developing an electric vehicle fleet, or if they become much more energy efficient. seems like my slides are blocked. All right. So this is so France as a market for us. So before the lockdowns globally, so the ultracapacitors global market was estimated around 2 billion euros right now. Was very with a strong strong development expected in the coming years. So, for instance, the market is expected to grow to 18 billion euros by 2022. Our estimate for France is that right now the ultracapacitor market is around 150 million. It's mostly driven by big companies. So again, as I mentioned, in France, the role of SMEs in the economy is less important than the role of big companies and corporations, whether they're French or not. It's not for this. So the main drivers of the ultracapacitor market in France are companies like Total, Engie, which is which both are in the energy sector and renewables. Companies like General Electric, both for the medical sector and for the grid and the renewable energy sector. Companies like Schneider Electric. So these companies happen to be heavily affected by the economic downturn that expected, but in return, they're also expected to strongly benefit from the potential recovery plans or stimulus package, etc. So right now, let's say that's it's a kind of a good uncertainty, and we can't assume that these companies are totally going to slow down or collapse because of the lack of economic support. I mean, we are still, all of us are still waiting for the main announcement of the French government, which and some of them are due for the coming days. But it's particularly true for the automotive industry, for instance. As you know, the automotive industry is quite important in France. The lockdown has been much more strict in France for the automotive industry compared to Germany, for instance. In Germany, all the production lines were still operating during the lockdown, which was not the case in all of the factories in France. There are already some rumors that companies such as manufacturers such as Renault may end up closing down some of the factories, or perhaps focus on some factories they have in other countries like Morocco, for instance. However, again, this is going to strongly depend on what kind of support the government may announce or not for the automotive industry in the coming days or in the coming weeks. The trend, which makes us more or less optimistic, is that given the political context and given that the energy transition is a very really important topic in France, we expect that this kind of stimulus and support package, which could be given to the automotive industry, is going to really support the ones that are developing electric or hybrid vehicles, which would give us opportunities, but would also give a lot of opportunities for clean tech companies, for instance. I mean, not only us. So the automotive sector is expected to lose like 20% this year. However, and the electric vehicles in particular was supposed to be booming, particularly this year. I mean, so last year electric vehicle sales were only like 2% of the market in France. In January, it was 4%. In January this year, it was 4%. So we're expecting some important growth this year. But of course, this is going to be kind of put on hold because of the economic lockdown. However, having said that, analysts still expect the electric vehicle market to be around 27% of the sales of new vehicles in France by 2028. So even if 2020 is obviously going to be a very difficult year for the French economy and for the automotive markets in particular. Most of the analysts expect that the recovery is going to be almost as strong as the economic downturn that expected this year. Still about the automotive industry, there are some rumors that the government is probably going to strongly incentivize the sale, incentivize the fact of buying electric vehicles, which could potentially be a game changer for the electric vehicle market in France. Like we're talking about amount like 6,000 euros given for any individual, any company which will change his car and buy an electric vehicle. The government is also proposing, and particularly the Île-de-France region, similar schemes to support buying electric bicycles. We're talking about 500 euros given for people who buy electric bicycles. So what we can expect is that in the coming months, much more incentives are going to be given to support electrification technologies in general in France, which again could pave the way for stronger development of the clean tech sector and for opportunities for clean tech companies from Estonia as well. On our side, we're already working with some French customers, mostly big companies like RTE, for instance, which is the biggest grid operator in France, with General Electric Healthcare for magnetic resonance image machines. So in the medical sector, and with Real IMECA for cranes. Real IMECA is a smaller company based out in La Rochelle on the Atlantic coast. But there are also some of our important customers in France. We do have more of them, but we've noticed that many of our French clients actually don't want us to disclose them. It's not something that we particularly understand, but yeah, France remains an important market for us. But yeah, as I said, the future and the evolution of the French economy is going to really heavily depend on how the economic recovery is going to happen and which sector are going to be favored. So yeah, again, let's say we have some kind of a optimistic uncertainty ahead for us, and we're waiting to see how the different stimulus packages are going to be shared between sectors. But yeah, again, we are dealing with both the sectors which are the most heavily affected, and also the ones that are expected to get the major part of support as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Arnaud. I have actually a question to you.
Yeah.
During this COVID-19 crisis, I mean, we're still in the crisis, but during the lockdown in France, did you had any communication with your French customers, and were there some more difficulties to reach them, or maybe you can just give some tips to Estonian companies in that sense, and what do you think the coming, weeks or months going to be like, on a very practical side when you communicate with your partners?
Yeah, so I don't deal directly with the customers. However, my colleagues from sales told me that it didn't actually the lockdown didn't affect too much the relation with the customers. For instance, just to give the example of GE Healthcare, we were collaborating with them on launching some new ultra capacitors specifically for these MR machines. And actually, we still delivered these ultra capacitors and made them public during the lockdown. So this has not affected too much. But again, it's because we are dealing. Our relations with our clients are like from the sales part to the sales part. So in both cases, the kind of jobs which are not which can easily move and work online, etc. So it's not so even if the relation is still going on between workers from both employees from both sides, if then the factories are not operating or the projects are not working, etc., then I mean it's still problematic. But no, I mean most of our clients and most of this kind of French companies actually did manage, at least for the manager jobs, services jobs, did manage to switch to working remotely. So even in the industry sector, I mean, we may expect sometimes that the industry sector is a bit slower to react, but now, and it's probably going to be the trend for the future as well. Now, like online tools are widely spread in France as well, and this in some ways this lockdown also like pushed everyone to find some ways to use online tools. So no, the discussion and the connection with French clients hasn't been too much impacted because of the pandemic and the lockdowns.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we have actually two questions from our participants. Maybe I will ask the one that is directly meant for you, Arnaud. So could you please highlight the 1 or 3 most difficult steps or obstacles that awaited you when entering with your product to the French market?
Yeah, so main difficulties are quite related to the kind of product that we sell. So most of the products that we sell are for projects which have kind of which are developed over 5 or 10 years. So I mean, what we sell right now are going to be used in products only. I mean, not before 5 years, for instance. So that's why it's very challenging to deal with the automotive industry, for instance, because the moment when we do the sale is really far away from the moment when the car is actually produced, meaning that negotiations take quite a lot of time with a lot of necessary different steps and phases of test, of evaluation, like procurement, etc. So this is so all of the contracts that we negotiate with the sector are taking quite a lot of time. To be fully honest, our company skeleton was not doing massively in terms of sales until last year. It's really last year that we managed to unlock a lot of new clients, because all of these negotiations can take quite a lot of time. So but that's very specific to like dealing with manufacturing sector, or dealing with industries. That everything that we I mean, the kind of sector we are operating with actually are talking about a production line which can take, and development phases that can take from 5 to 10 years. So this is one of the major issue that we have. And the thing is that in the past year as well, a lot of the French companies were like really pressured to lower a lot of their costs, meaning that when we, in our case, when we compete with companies coming from other countries like China, etc., then of course we are less competitive because our entire supply chain is in Europe. But we also see that this is a trend that can be reversed in some ways, and that now actually going to have, we expect, a stronger focus in quality, and in our case I mean, how much CO2 emission we avoid, how much energy, how better our energy efficiency is using our products. So the fact that we're having a fully European supply chain is going to become an advantage in the very, very near future. So, but in the past we have been competing with other companies on the cost, and we are less competitive. So yeah, those are the major challenges, and but yeah, nothing that we can't overcome.
Thank you very much. Well, we are a little bit late in our schedule, and we still have Aurélien from Bolt, but there is one question from one of the participants, which is pretty detailed question, actually, I would say. So maybe we can't answer it right now, and we have also to discuss about it. We can discuss about it later, but maybe Arnaud, as there is automotive sector which could be concerned, maybe I just read it very quickly.
Yeah.
So is there a need for ultra quality 3D visualization company that delivers all Estonian 3D images, animations, and VR headset experiences? So I understand the target is real estate and development sector, but the Estonian company could be also open to new fields like automotive and product visualization and so on. So I personally, I don't have an answer right now.
Yeah.
I think we should analyze it a little bit, and we can also keep in contact by Skype or by email.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, same as you. I don't have the answer right now, but I can definitely try to research and perhaps ask a bit around. So because I'd be interested in knowing the answer myself as well. So yeah, we can exchange our contact details.
Yeah, great. So and now I will actually give floor to Aurélien.
Yes, hello.
From Bolt.
Yes.
So sorry to be a little bit late.
No worries. And I speak fast, so I'll try to be
great.
brief. Okay. Not sure if my video is working now. I think it's going to be. Hello, everybody. So thank you to Enterprise Estonia and Estonia Trade for organizing this and giving Bolt the opportunity to introduce a bit what we've done during this crisis. My name is Aurélien Pouzana. I'm in charge of public policy for Western Europe at Bolt. I'm sure you all know very well Bolt, but just to update you maybe on where we stand these days. We now operate in 35 countries, including 16 member states in the EU. There are about 1 million drivers which are registered on our platform. Our regional activities definitely focus on Europe and Africa. I think, as you know, we started being a taxi and then quickly a ride-hailing platform, but more and more shifting to being a urban mobility platform, which means that in addition to ride-hailing cars, we've had now added electric scooters, for example, delivery. I will come back to that in the presentation, and also, for example, motor taxis in Africa, and probably, let's see in the future, but other means of transport. So this is, I mean, definitely we are, offering this multimodal approach of urban transport, and in addition to delivery. And this is a strong trend. About Bolt in France, launched in October 2017, so that's about 2 years and a half now with ride-hailing. It's a team of about now 20 people, which is pretty small compared to our competitors. But again, I'll come back to that, and maybe that's one of our assets, actually, generally speaking, in France, but also for the company. Of course, we use the support from headquarters in Tallinn for a number of functions. We operate ride-hailing in Paris. That's most of our activities takes place, but we also operate in the city of Lyon, which is one of the biggest cities in France, which you may know. I think one of the previous speakers was mentioning the different sectors which have been impacted during this period. Of course, transport, and specifically urban transport, has been highly impacted. As it was said, we've been going through a 2-month lockdown period, which started about mid-March and has ended 10 days ago. So of course, people have very much limited their moves within cities. I mean, the activity in France has dropped above 80%, basically, when it comes to ride-hailing for us, but it was similar to other platforms. So this is, I mean, as you can imagine, high very strong impact on our activity. So one of the good things of being in a country where you pay high taxes, at least sometimes it becomes an advantage. It's indeed that, as it was underlined, the support from the state has been pretty strong. So when it comes to our own employees in France, we have been able to use this scheme, which you call furlough, I think, in the UK, but we call it partial unemployment in France, where basically the state has paid for 85% of employees who were fully put inactive during this period. And we have done this for part of our team. And for others, you were able to say that, for example, you would only work 50% of the time, and therefore the state would more or less support 50% of your salary, which would be basically people would keep their salaries, though not as working as much. And this is indeed going on until the end of May. And for some sectors, it will be possible to maintain this further. This is about our employees, but as you know, for the drivers, they are not our employees, they are self-employed, and actually in France, they are usually micro business and so independent. There again, there has been some support, and the French government has granted under certain conditions, but which were not too strict, for independent workers to be granted, I think, 1,500 euro per month. Plus, there were, for those who had employees, there was additional support. So that also was very important for us, because, I mean, if the drivers can't go through this crisis, it becomes, of course, an issue to us. Now, how we reacted during this crisis, of course, liaising with our headquarters in Tallinn, but also adapting it to the French market. Well, I think one of the good things about working in a scale-up is that it is able to pivot quickly and adapt as much as possible to a crisis, and sometimes to reinvent themselves to face the crisis. And I think Bolt has a very good strengths in being able to do this. So of course, as you can imagine, people now in this gradual end of lockdown period are still a bit worried about the virus itself, and also, I mean, people still need to distance and so on, as recommended by the government. So what we have put in place is a protect category, which is basically cars which are equipped with isolation screens from the drivers and the passengers, and that would protect both the passenger and the driver. So if I may, I'm going to try to share with you my screen here. Let me, yes, here. Yes. So I hope you now see it. These are some visuals you can see that we have put in place. This is, for example, messages we have sent to our clients. First of all, we recommended national rules, being that the government has asked that masks be worn by the passenger and the driver, except when we have those isolation screens. So this is the Bolt Protect app message I was talking about, and with those visualizations which were done, and we also did recommendations to put in the cars so that the clients would know how to behave in the car, and not, for example, too many people shouldn't sit in the car, and so on. And here you can see an example of an isolation screen which was installed by a driver in its car. So our hope is that with this protect category, which is in the mobile app, basically when you order a car now, you can have the choice of ordering a classic car or ordering a car with this isolation screen. We hope that this will give us a strong advantage towards the competition, which has not installed this. Now, what else have we done? We have also accelerated, and that was decided at, of course, a global level, our delivery offer. As you know, ride-hailing orders have declined, but at the same time, delivery, especially food delivery, for example, or grocery delivery, has accelerated because people were less willing to do shopping. So this has been accelerating, globally speaking, at the company. In France, maybe not as much as other countries for regulation matters, but still, this has been able to, offer additional services during the crisis. We have also offered to transport medical staff with discounts. And I think beyond, of course, the commercial interest, this was also a good thing to position ourselves towards the government, I would say, and the stakeholders. We have also ordered, of course, masks for the driver, even though there was supply issues. It took a bit of time. I think many countries faced similar issues, but now they have arrived, and we are able to provide masks, of course, to our teams, which welcome the drivers, but also to the drivers themselves. What kind of lessons I think we can draw from this crisis? First of all, I think Bolt was already a company where employees are very much used to work with Zoom calls the same way we are doing right now, or working from home. But I think this has accelerated the trend, and probably in the company, I know we are assessing right now how this could be extended in a more normal period. And I think this is something you're going to see more and more in France. I don't know if this gives opportunity maybe more to work with teams which are situated in remote places. But I think definitely even in big companies in France where there was a bit, a bit caution about the fact that letting people work from home, this period has demonstrated that it's possible, that companies were able to adapt when the systems quite quickly, and that it worked. So you have major companies such as PSA, Peugeot, Citroën, which is one of the two main OEM automobile manufacturers in France, which is already saying that this will become the rule for people for support functions. As a team, we have been trying in France, to try to keep, despite the fact we were working from home, some kind of energy in the team. So we organized like online breakfast, once a week to share, and I think that's very important to keep the spirits high. And as I was saying, being a small team has enabled Bolt until now to actually do no layoffs, which has, contrary to our main competitors, which have up to 25% of their workforces have been laid off. Well, Bolt has done none of this because of the lean management of the company, which has definitely proven to be a strong asset during this period. On my part, being a more public policy person, I have appreciated the fact that I have been able to speak on a very regular basis in France with the government to exchange, say where we were standing, our needs, and so on. I can't say it always led to results, of course, but at least there was this dialogue between private stakeholders and the government, which was transport. And finally, as Arnaud mentioned, of course, definitely we're going to see an acceleration of green transport, and especially electric bikes, and I hope also electric cars, acceleration of EVs, and also very important, the acceleration of the installation of charging points in the streets, because that's one of the conditions to see a more widespread use of electric cars in France. Bikes are kind of the number one topic in the media these days. Well, maybe not the number one, but one of the top topics these days, especially in Paris, where the city, the mayor is very much advocating and actually enforcing measures to develop this. So in the end, of course, strong impact. The recovery is still slow, but it's positive. And it definitely shows that the lean management structure of a scale-up such as Bolt has been an asset in this time, and maybe actually could give an advantage and the rebound compared to our competitors. And let's stay, of course, cautious. Could be positive in the end. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aurélien. There is actually a question to you from one of our participants, you already probably answered to some extent. So the question is whether and how you have used the situation to present or promote your brand, and how fast recovery you expect. Like, did this situation gave you, I don't know, maybe more opportunity to?
I think, well, I mean, for example, we are the only ones to have this bolt protect car category with the isolation screen. So I think that's something we were able to leverage. I think also we are currently applying for electric scooters in the frame of selective processes in Paris and Lyon, actually, and we were able to also underline the environmental advantages of our products, and this is very important in this specific time. As for the recovery, it's already positive, but it's going to be not gradual, because basically people are slowly returning to work. I think it will definitely be more like beginning of June, where all people will, well, most people will return to work. I mean, myself, I'm still working from home, and the team is still working from home, and so are many of my friends. So this will be gradual, but we are confident in the fact that we will be able to recover, and we're also confident in the fact that we can use this as an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Aurélien. So we are a little bit late, but that's, well, that happens. So actually, we are now going to conclude this webinar. Wait. And I would just to say that if ever you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. You can also contact Christelle Amélie, or we can have Skypes or chats together with you. So you can see here my email address. At EIS, we also have several services that we can offer you, and at this crisis time we have adapted a little bit our services, so we can discuss about it apart. And I will just try to put my camera on to yes, just a moment, to say goodbye to everybody. So I don't know if you saw this screen with my email address. So as I said, just don't hesitate to contact us. I guess there could be some, and we will be more than happy to answer to them. And thank you very much for your patience, and thank you very much to all our speakers also to take your time in this very particular moment. So thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you also from my part.